You walk out to the garden on a fine, quiet morning with your coffee cup warming your hands, and your heart suddenly sinks. The squash leaves that were green, broad, and full of life just 3 days ago are dusted over with a pale, gray powder, looking exactly as though someone shook a heavy sack of flour right across your patch. You lean down closer, and you see the rose Esther tends so carefully by the porch steps has dark, oily black spots spreading across every mature leaf. Underneath, on the soft, tender new growth, those little green aphids are clustered so thick and dense that the stem itself looks alive, crawling and shimmering in the early morning light. Your first thought is the very same one the big commercial garden store down the road is counting on. You feel that sudden prick of panic in your chest, and you think you need to go buy something immediately to save your hard work. You picture yourself driving down to the store, walking past rows of high plastic shelves, and picking up a heavy bottle of chemical poison with a skull on the label and a steep price marked on the shelf. You think that is what it takes to protect your harvest. I am going to ask you to put your wallet away. Just stop and think for a moment. Understand this: the most effective, reliable thing you can spray on a sick, struggling garden is very likely sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now, inside a small cardboard box that cost you less than $1. I am Elias. My family came over to this country from the Palatinate back in 1838, and we have grown our own food, saved our own seeds, and turned this Lancaster County ground every single year since. That is 7 generations of hands working in this very same dirt. And I will tell you plainly, long before the garden store ever existed to sell you chemical poison in bright plastic bottles, folks kept their plants clean, green, and healthy, using simple, honest things right from the household pantry. One of the simplest, cheapest, and most thoroughly proven of those things is plain old baking soda today. I am going to show you how to mix a traditional baking soda spray that completely knocks back the 2 specific troubles that ruin more backyard gardens than almost anything else. But before I do that, I am also going to be entirely straight with you about what this method does and what it absolutely does not do. Understand this clearly. A man who promises you that one single bottle from his shelf cures every single sickness in nature is the very same man who is trying to sell you that bottle. I have no interest in selling you anything. I only want to share what has stood the test of time on this farm. Passed down through hands that knew the soil, let us start with the thing you most need to understand, because it is the core truth that makes this whole spray make sense. Most of what ruins a home garden is not 100 different invisible enemies requiring 100 different complex chemical cures. When you strip away the panic and look closely, it is mainly just 2 kinds of trouble. And this one cheap, homemade spray happens to work beautifully against both of them at the same time. The first kind of trouble is fungus. That gray, ghostly powder on your squash and cucumber leaves. The old folks call it powdery mildew, the ugly black spots that defoliate your roses and leave them bare. The rusty orange dust that appears under a bean leaf after a heavy rain. Those are not insects. They are living, spreading molds. A fungus that takes hold on the damp, shaded surface of a leaf, spreading its tiny roots into the plant, choking it slowly until it cannot breathe or catch the sun. And here is exactly where the baking soda earns its keep. When you dissolve it in water and coat a leaf, the baking soda changes the chemistry of that leaf's surface. It makes it just slightly less sour and slightly more sweet, or as the modern books say, it raises the pH, making it alkaline. That tiny, subtle shift means absolutely nothing to the tough plant, but it creates a completely hostile environment for a fungus spore. It does not burn the mold off like a harsh chemical poison. It quietly changes the ground right out from under the fungus so it can never get a foothold to breed and spread. This is not a superstitious folk notion I am spinning you here on the porch. It is a plain, scientifically proven fact. Even the government's own modern agricultural registries have set down plain sodium bicarbonate, on their official lists as an approved natural pest and disease helper. The science is only just catching up to what my grandmother watched happen in her rows 80 years ago. The second kind of trouble is the soft little sucking insects. The aphids, the spider mites, the thrips, the tiny, soft-bodied creatures that cluster in the dark crevices of new growth and drink the sweet life right out of your stems. Those pests are handled not by the baking soda itself, but by the second ingredient we add to our mix, a simple, clean oil. When a fine coat of oil settles over those tiny, soft bodies, it simply smothers them. They do not breathe through lungs like we do. They breathe through tiny openings in their skin, in a manner of speaking, and a microscopic film of oil closes those openings off immediately. So, you see the elegance of it. The soda handles the fungus, the oil handles the soft bugs, and together in one simple jar. They cover the two massive troubles that account for 80% of what you will ever have to fight in a backyard garden plot. But let me be completely honest with you now. The way I would want a neighbor to be honest with me across the fence line. This is where modern gardening videos usually oversell their remedies and lose your trust. This baking soda spray is a magnificent tool, but it is not a magic wand for everything that crawls through the dirt. It will do absolutely nothing against a fat green hornworm eating your tomato tops. It will not stop a hard-shelled cucumber beetle or a borer that has already tunneled deep inside your squash vines. Those are bigger, tougher, armored creatures, and they require entirely different answers. I am not going to stand here and tell you that a $1 box of soda solves every single misery in the garden, because it does not. And you would rightly call me a fraud the first time a cabbage worm sat on your leaf and laughed at it. Know exactly what a tool is for, and it will never let you down. Now, stop and ask yourself a hard question. Who actually profits from your believing that gardening has to be complicated, terrifying, and expensive? Why do you pay $20 a bottle for something you could make for pennies? There is absolutely no money to be made by big companies in a $1 box of baking soda and a spoonful of kitchen oil. None at all. You already own them both. But there is an entire wall of plastic bottles at the commercial nursery, each one featuring a bright, terrifying label and its own separate price tag. One bottle for mildew, one for aphids, one for mites, one for black spot, as though nature created a completely different structural crisis for every single leaf. Many of those expensive commercial formulas do, at their very core, the exact same simple work that this home pantry spray achieves. They just sell it to you one isolated problem at a time, season after season, relying on your fear of losing your plants. It is a system that simply pays better to keep you dependent on a shelf of poisons than to teach you how 2 kitchen ingredients in clean water can handle the bulk of your worries. Our ancestors didn't have a garden store, and their lives depended entirely on the harvest. They survived because they understood how to look at a leaf, understand its nature, and apply a gentle, balanced remedy from what they had on hand. Knowing what this spray does, though, is only the first step of the journey. The true craft of the practitioner is not just knowing the ingredients, but knowing exactly how to marry them together in the bucket. If you mix this too weak, the fungus will laugh at it and keep spreading through your rows. If you mix it just a fraction too strong, or if you apply it at the wrong hour of the day, when the sun is high and hot, you will scorch and burn the very leaves you are trying to save, doing far more damage than the aphids ever could. There is a precise, careful way to blend the water, the soda and the oil, so they stay bound together, and a strict rule for how to test it on your plants safely before you ever spray a whole row. Let me bring you over to the workbench right here under the shade, and I will show you the exact measurements, the secret to making oil and water stay mixed, and the old-fashioned testing method that ensures your plants thrive while the pests clear out. Step right over here to the wooden workbench, out of the direct glare of the morning sun. To mix this properly, you need to see exactly what you are doing, because accuracy here is the difference between a thriving garden and a scorched one. We begin with the foundation of the whole mix, which is water. I have a clean, clear glass jar here filled with exactly 1 quart, about a liter of pure water. Now, if you can, always use rainwater caught clean off the roof in a wooden barrel or a cistern. It is soft, it lacks the harsh chemical chlorine and lime that city pipes carry, and the plants recognize it as their own. If tap water is all you have, just let it sit out in an open bucket overnight to let the gases dissipate. Look at the water in the glass. It should be still, clear, and cool to the touch, not ice cold from a deep well, which shocks a tender leaf. Now, reach for your box of plain baking soda. Slide the cardboard tab open. I want you to look at it closely. It should be perfectly white, dry, and soft as talc between your fingers, with absolutely no clumps. Take a standard kitchen's measuring spoon and scoop out exactly 2 level teaspoons. Not heaping, mind you. Scrape the excess off flat with the back of a knife. Let me warn you about the first big pitfall that trips up many well-meaning beginners. People think if a little is good, a lot must be better. They see a heavy breakout of mildew and they throw 3, 4, or 5 tablespoons into the jar, thinking they will scrub the leaves clean. Do not do it. Baking soda is a mineral salt. If you overload the water, that salt will draw the moisture right out of the plant cells, and by tomorrow morning, your beautiful squash leaves will look like they were blasted with a blowtorch. Brown, brittle, and dead. Stick strictly to 2 level teaspoons for your standard mix. If the fungus has a terrible stubborn hold on an old patch of pumpkins, you can stretch it to 3 teaspoons. But that is the absolute ceiling. Never go beyond it. Tip the white powder directly into the clear water. Watch how it drifts down to the bottom like a gentle winter flurry, settling in a quiet white layer at the base of the jar. Next comes our smothering agent, the oil. I am using plain, golden sunflower oil from the pantry today. It has a mild, clean smell and a thick, smooth consistency that pours in a heavy golden ribbon. Measure out exactly 1 teaspoon. As you pour it into the jar, stop and look at what happens. The gold oil doesn't want anything to do with the water. It breaks into heavy, floating beads, rises immediately to the top, and forms a thick, shimmering amber slick right on the surface. They sit there, completely separate. 2 different worlds in one glass. If you tried to spray this right now, the pump would draw nothing but plain water from the bottom first, doing nothing to the aphids, and then it would finish with a blast of pure, heavy oil at the end that would smother the pores of the leaf itself, suffocating the plant. To marry them together, we need our third ingredient, the peacemaker. This is a simple, liquid soap. I use a traditional, clear, vegetable-based cast-style soap, though a plain, old-fashioned dish liquid works too. It should smell only of clean soap. Nothing with synthetic lemon perfumes, heavy degreasers, or chemical bleach additives. We only need about 10 drops. Watch as the heavy, clear drops fall through the oil layer. They sink slowly, like small beads of resin, pulling the oil down with them into the water. Now, take a clean wooden stick and stir the mixture firmly, or cap your jar, and give it a steady, rhythmic shake. Watch the transformation inside the glass. The sharp separation vanishes. The clear water and the golden oil blend into a uniform, milky white liquid that looks almost like thin skim milk. The smell changes too. It carries the faint, clean scent of the soap mixed with the earthy undertone of the oil. This is exactly what you are looking for. The soap has broken the oil into millions of microscopic droplets and suspended them evenly throughout the water, so that every single mist that leaves your spray nozzle will carry the exact same balanced ratio of soda, oil, and water. But understand this marriage is a temporary one. Even with the soap, if you let this jar sit on the bench for 10 minutes while you go fetch a tool, the oil will begin to drift back to the top, forming that amber slick once again. When you pour this milky fluid into your hand sprayer, you must make it a physical habit to give the bottle a firm, rolling shake every 3 or 4 minutes as you walk your garden rows. Keep it married while you work. Before you step up to your troubled plants, with the nozzle raised, there is one final, crucial discipline practiced by every veteran gardener who respects their plot. You must perform a patch test. Every plant variety is an individual. A thick, fuzzy pumpkin leaf can handle a much stronger spray than a tender, translucent cucumber leaf or a young rosebud. Walk over to the sick plant. Select just one single leaf that is showing a bit of the gray mildew or a few aphids, and give it a light, even misting from your bottle until it is damp but not dripping wet. Now, step away. Go finish your morning coffee, sit on the porch, and leave that leaf alone for at least 2 full hours. When you return, examine it closely under the light. If the leaf remains upright, green, and flexible, your mix is perfectly balanced and safe. If, however, the edges of that test leaf have begun to curl downward, turn a dark, bruised gray, or look wilted and scorched, your mixture is too strong for that specific plant. Do not despair. Simply pour the mix back into a bucket, add another cup of clean water to dilute the strength, and test a different leaf. It costs you nothing but a bit of patience, and it saves you from destroying an entire season's harvest in 5 minutes of careless spraying. When the test shows it is safe, you may proceed to treat the trouble. But timing is everything. Never ever spray this mixture in the heat of the noon sun. The tiny droplets of oil and water act like tiny magnifying glasses on the leaf surface, intensifying the sun's rays and scorching the tissue instantly. Instead, wait for the quiet, cool hours of the fading evening when the sun has dipped below the tree line, or the very early dawn before the heat breaks. Adjust your spray nozzle until it delivers a fine, drifting mist, not a hard jet stream that tears at the foliage. Approach the plant and spray with a deliberate, steady hand. Begin from the bottom up. Most beginners only spray the tops of the leaves because that is what catches their eye. But the fungus spores and the heavy clusters of aphids love the damp, protected darkness underneath. Tilt the nozzle upward and thoroughly coat the undersides of the leaves until the milky mist covers every crevice where the pests hide. As you spray, keep your eyes wide open for the helpers. If you see a bright red ladybug busy at work, devouring aphids, or a lacewing resting on a stem, pass over that branch and leave them be. This spray is a tool to manage trouble, not a weapon to wipe out the local ecology. Coat the affected foliage evenly. Ensure the liquid is clinging nicely without running off in heavy streams, and remember to give the bottle that regular, steady shake as you move down the row. You now have the full knowledge of how to brew and apply this traditional remedy safely. The milk-white liquid in your sprayer is ready. But there is still one vital piece of the puzzle we haven't touched upon: the hidden reality of how often to repeat this process, how it behaves when the summer rains come washing through your valley, and how to store the leftover mix so it doesn't spoil in the shed. Now that the milky spray is mixed and the quiet evening hours have come, let us sit back on the bench for a moment and look at the deeper truth of what is actually happening on the surface of that leaf. It is one thing to follow a recipe like a cook reading a book. It is a far better thing to understand the invisible forces at play, because a gardener who understands the why will never be fooled by changing weather or a new pest. Let us look at the science of it, stripped of the heavy, confusing terminology of the laboratory, and brought down to the simple laws of the natural world we can see and touch. First, consider the fungus, that white powdery mildew on your squash, or the dark spots on Esther's roses. To understand why a simple kitchen powder stops a living mold in its tracks, you have to realize that every living thing in nature requires a very specific climate to survive. A fish needs water. A moss needs deep, damp shade. A fungus spore is no different. It is an incredibly delicate, microscopic plant-like organism that can only sprout, grow, and drive its tiny roots into a leaf if that leaf's surface matches its preferred environment exactly. And that preferred environment is highly acidic, what the old folks call sour. When you dissolve baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, into water and coat the leaf, You are not spraying a toxic poison that kills the fungus through chemical warfare. Instead, you are introducing a mild, highly alkaline mineral. Alkaline is simply the opposite of acidic. It is what we call sweet or basic. The moment that milky film dries, it completely shifts the environment of the leaf surface, making it alkaline. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a piece of fertile, damp ground where only specific wild ferns love to grow. If you suddenly come along and spread a heavy layer of dry sand over that soil, the ferns cannot grow there anymore. You didn't shoot the ferns or poison them with a chemical. You simply change the ground beneath them so completely that their seeds cannot germinate. That is exactly what baking soda does to a fungus spore. The spore lands on the leaf, finds the environment completely altered, and it simply starves or dries up without ever getting a foothold. It is an elegant, non-toxic way to defend a plant by managing its microclimate rather than poisoning its tissue. Now, let us look at the oil and the soap, and how they handle the soft little sucking insects like aphids and mites. These insects do not possess lungs or a throat like a mammal. Instead, nature designed them with a row of microscopic breathing pores along the sides of their tiny, soft bodies. The scientists call them spiracles. But you can think of them simply as tiny windows through which the insect draws its air. When you spray our mixture, the soap allows the oil to spread out into a microscopic, completely unbroken sheet over the insect's skin. The oil plugs those tiny breathing windows instantly. It is a purely mechanical action. It smothers them. Because it is a physical barrier rather than a chemical nerve poison, the insects can never build up a resistance to it. A bug can evolve to tolerate a chemical toxin over many generations. But it can never evolve a way to breathe without its breathing pores. But now, let us step away from the enthusiasm of the discovery and look at the honest limits of this method. Because this is where we must separate real, working homestead knowledge from internet fairy tales. A tool that is promised to do everything eventually does nothing well. This baking soda and oil mix has very strict boundaries of where it works and where it is completely useless. First, let us talk about the weather and its limitations. This spray is entirely a preventative and a surface management tool. It stays on the outside of the leaf. This means the very first heavy summer thunderstorm that rolls through your valley will wash your baking soda and oil right off the plant and into the dirt. The protection is gone the moment the leaves are rinsed clean. Therefore, if you are in a rainy season, you cannot simply spray once and walk away. You have to monitor the weather, and you must accept that you will need to reapply the mixture every single time a heavy rain clears, or at least once every 7 to 10 days during a damp spell to keep the new growth protected. If you are looking for a lazy one-shot solution that lasts all summer, this is not it. Second, understand its limitations regarding the stage of the disease. This spray is a shield, not a resurrector of dead tissue. If you walk out to your garden and find that your cucumber vines have already turned entirely black, shriveled up, and died from a massive fungal infection, spraying them with baking soda now is nothing but a waste of your time and your soda. It cannot repair cells that have already been destroyed by fungus roots. It is designed to be used at the very first sign of trouble. The first tiny gray spot, the first cluster of 3 aphids on a rosebud, or better yet, as a regular preventative spray on plants you know are prone to sickness every year. It keeps the healthy leaves healthy. It does not bring the dead back to life. Third, look at the nature of the pests it cannot touch. We mentioned the armored insects before, but understand the science of why they escape this treatment. A heavy, hard-shelled Japanese beetle, a thick-skinned squash bug, or a fat, velvet-skinned tomato hornworm has a completely different breathing and protection system than an aphid. Their outer shells are thick, waxy, and highly resistant to a mild oil film. They can simply walk right through the spray, wipe their bodies clean on a leaf, and continue chewing your harvest to pieces. Furthermore, any insect that lives inside the plant, like the dreaded squash vine borer that hatches from an egg and immediately tunnels deep into the hollow center of the stem, is completely safe from this spray. The milky liquid sits on the outside of the vine, while the worm eats peacefully on the inside where the spray can never reach it. Finally, consider the plant varieties themselves. This mixture is excellent for tough, rugged foliage like squash, pumpkins, melons, and mature rose bushes, but it can be highly dangerous to delicate, thin-skinned greens. If you spray this at standard strength onto tender young lettuce leaves, spinach, or very early tomato seedlings just out of the greenhouse, you run a very high risk of chemical leaf burn, even if you follow the directions closely. Their cellular walls are simply too thin to handle the mineral salt of the baking soda. So, you see the true shape of the tool now. It is a surface-shielding, weather-dependent helper that excels at stopping early fungus and soft-skinned pests on tough-leaved plants. It is cheap, it is honest, and within these boundaries, it will save your garden for pennies. But knowing the science and the limits still leaves one practical problem unsolved. How does this mixture behave over time once it is inside the spray bottle? And what happens to the soil below when the spray inevitably drips off the leaves day after day? As we sit here watching the shadows lengthen across the garden rows, and the mist we just sprayed settles quietly on the leaves, it is worth looking back down the long road that brought this knowledge to our doorstep. We are not the first folks to stand in a garden patch at twilight, wondering how to save our food from the rot and the bugs without poisoning the very ground that feeds us. This simple white powder we call baking soda has a long, deep history that connects us to the earliest builders of human civilization. Long before it ever came packaged in a neat little cardboard box with a brand name on the front, the ancient peoples knew its power. Thousands of years ago, the Egyptians harvested a natural mineral crust from the dry beds of the desert lakes, a white, crystalline salt they called natron, which was a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate. They didn't have laboratories to test its pH, but they used it to cleanse their homes, preserve what was precious, and keep their stored grains safe from the mold and the dampness of the earth. But the specific magic of using this mineral to protect living plants. What my family has done here in Lancaster County for generations is a craft that was truly forged in the great testing ground of the 19th century. When my ancestors came over from the Palatinate in 1838, they brought with them a deep, quiet tradition of looking at the household kitchen and the wood-fired hearth as the primary source of medicine for both man and soil. In those days, if a fungus took your potatoes or your squash, your family went hungry in the winter. There was no store to save you. So folks watched the land with an intensity we can barely imagine today. By the late 1800s, as the industrial world began to grow, practical farmers and early agricultural researchers started documenting these pantry methods in writing, proving that what the old folks did by instinct was grounded in immutable natural laws. If you look back into the dusty archives of the early state agricultural experiment stations from the 1890s and the turn of the last century, you will find reports where researchers took plain bicarbonate salts and tested them against the devastating powdery mildews of grapes and gooseberries. They found that these simple, cheap minerals worked just as effectively as the heavy, costly copper and sulfur sprays of the day, with none of the lingering poison left in the soil in the decades that followed. As the big chemical companies began to dominate the landscape with their powerful synthetic poisons, this quiet knowledge was nearly buried under a mountain of advertising. But truth has a way of staying alive in the corners of the world where people still work with their hands. In the latter part of the 20th century, universities researchers began to pull these old remedies back into the light. In the 1990s, extensive studies at Cornell University officially confirmed what the old gardeners always knew. They proved that a simple spray of sodium bicarbonate combined with a horticultural oil drastically reduced black spot on roses and completely halted the spread of powdery mildew on agricultural crops. Today, if you look at the strict guidelines of the National Organic Standards Board, you will see that plain potassium and sodium bicarbonates are formally registered and approved for use in organic food production. Think about that for a moment. Step back and look at the whole picture. The very same substance that the modern state inspectors and university scientists certify as a safe, natural helper for a multi-million-dollar organic farm is the exact same dollar box of white powder that has been sitting quietly on your pantry shelf all along, waiting for you to notice it. We have come to a strange place in our modern world where we have been taught to mistrust anything that is simple, cheap, and accessible. We have been conditioned to believe that if a solution doesn't come in a heavy plastic bottle with a complicated chemical name and a high price tag, it cannot possibly possess the strength to save our gardens. We have handed over our independence to the salesman on the retail floor, trading the deep-tested wisdom of 7 generations for the quick illusion of a chemical fix. But the garden does not care about marketing, and it does not care about corporate profit. The garden only understands the plain, unchanging laws of nature, the sourness of a leaf that permits a mold to grow, and the simple sweetness of a mineral salt that bids it to stop. So, as you look out over your own patch of ground this week, whether you have a multi-acre homestead or just 3 prized rosebushes in pots by your back door, I invite you to take your independence back into your own 2 hands. Put away the wallet, bypass the chemical aisle, and step into your own kitchen. Take down that humble box of baking soda, measure out your water, and pour in that spoonful of plain cooking oil. Mix it with the care and the steady rhythm of a true craftsman. Perform your patch test, wait for the cool, gentle hours of the evening, and spray your troubled leaves with a clear mind and a confident hand. Understand this: when you do this, you are doing far more than just wiping a few aphids off a rose stem or clearing a bit of gray dust from a pumpkin vine. You are stepping back into a long, beautiful line of men and women who handled the earth with respect, intelligence, and restraint. You are choosing to mend your little piece of the world gently rather than poisoning it blindly. You are remembering what it means to be a true caretaker of the soil, working in harmony with the natural balance instead of trying to crush it with force. Try it for yourself this season. Watch the leaves clear. Watch the green come back to the stems, and see how beautifully the old knowledge still works on this modern earth. The tools you need to tend a healthy, abundant garden have been within your reach the entire time. They are sitting right there in your kitchen, simple, honest, and waiting for your hand. I am Elias, and I will be right here on the home place, keeping the old ways alive until we meet again across the fence line. Tend your ground well, keep your hands in the dirt, and may your harvest be peaceful, clean, and abundant.